Welcome to the meeting of two of the greatest minds in science fiction. Science fiction or sci-fi has always been a powerful force in opening our minds, enriching our imagination, bringing us new perspectives, and creating new worlds of wonder. It provides unique insights into our past and our present, and tantalizing and sometimes frightening glimpses into our future. Tantalizing because we have come such a long way, and our combined efforts will take us to new heights. Frightening so that we as human beings can put ourselves on alert and avert the catastrophe that might happen. From words to moving images, the wonderful worlds of science fiction are conceived and brought to vivid life by people with singular vision and boundless imagination, people who are solidly rooted in the nuts and bolts of science and knowledge, yet unfettered by the constraints of what we know today, but rather take great leaps into the unknown realm, strapped mainly with the safety belt of perception and logic. Our guest of honor today is constantly pushing the boundaries of technology to bring to life creatures and whole worlds new to us. He has plunged us into the abyss, surrounded us with aliens, threatened to terminate us twice, and is sending an angel by the name of Alita to our rescue. And of course, he has created avatars for the disenfranchised so that we can identify and empathize with them and learn from their nobility. So let's give a round of warm Beijing welcome to Mr. James Cameron, affectionately known in China as God's Cat. Our next guest is a homegrown hero in sci-fi. He is often credited as single-handedly raising China's sci-fi to world standard. His trilogy, The Three-Body Problem, which has been translated into English by Ken Liu, is such a towering achievement that every sci-fi aficionado in China has an opinion on how or who to turn it into a movie. And two of the best-selling movies of the current Chinese New Year season are adapted from his stories. Although you envisioned shivering cold and snows as high as skyscrapers in your movies, 年华临过之间回望。And I'm your moderator, Raymond Zhou Yiming. Science fiction is.
We met backstage already. That's the photo op here.
Science fiction is a very comprehensive genre that deals with many imaginative concepts, from time travel to aliens, from space exploration to cyberpunk. Mr. Cameron last year actually made a 6-episode documentary that is very encyclopedic in scope and is a wonderful point of departure for new lovers of this genre. For each of our distinguished guests, my first question is, what is your area of fascination and why? Starting. Okay.
我最感兴趣的科幻领域，因为刚才我们在后面谈到了克拉克，刚才我和导演在后面我们谈到了那个阿瑟克拉克。 其实也正是阿瑟克拉克的作品把我引上了这个科幻创作的这条道路，所以说我对科幻最感兴趣的领域，也就是克拉克描写的那种那样一个题材，就是描写那种很遥远的世界，描写那些很广阔的未知的，我们只能用想象力才能到达的那些世界。 包括当然主要是遥远的太空，还有一些别的，就是我们只能用想象力到达的这种世界。 我最感兴趣的科幻就是这样的科幻。
Let's不好意思，卡梅隆监督的那个同传那个逃出一个来。您再归纳一遍吧。
刚才我和那个卡梅伦导演在后面我们谈到了那个阿斯特拉克，也正是他的作品使我走上这个科幻创作的道路。所以我对您刚才那个问题，就是说我对科幻最感兴趣的领域，就是那些描写特别遥远的世界，描写我们只能用想象力才能到达的那个遥远世界的未知世界的那种科幻小说。就像那个克拉克的作品中描写的那样，就是说，这种小说它有小说和电影有尽可能广阔的这个视野。尽可能深远的时空，我是喜欢这样的科幻的领域。
跟您的工程师背景有什么关联吗？
这个没有关联，因为工程师是面向现实的，是一个工匠的东西。而我喜欢的这种科幻，它是面向这个未知的，面向未来的，是一种怎么说呢？更超脱的、更有哲学色彩的这么一种东西。它和工程师还真是不一样。
您也没想到过去学天体物理是吧？
我想去学，但我的分不够啊，我只能考上那个工科学校。一般你说的这个天体物理的大学，他的分都是很高的。
Mr. Cameron?
Well, I find your answer very interesting. I find your answer interesting. That was the first question that I asked Mr. Yu when we were backstage. I said, were you trained in physics or astrophysics or astronomy? And he said, no, I'm an engineer. And engineering is about that which is known. And I think his answer is very interesting because you're much more interested in that which is not known or which hasn't happened yet. I actually was, as a physicist, I studied physics and I studied astronomy because I was interested in the unknown and the very latest edge of science, and I wanted to understand it. And in my mind at the time, it was almost like a search for God. It was a search for what are the reasons? Why is the natural world the way it is? I wanted to understand that. And I actually think that the driving force for scientists and for science fiction writers is the same thing, to an extent, which is curiosity. The difference is a scientist will go and dedicate their life to finding out the answer, and a science fiction writer will just make it up. It's much quicker. It's much easier. We don't have to know the actual answer, we just make it up. But of course, science fiction writers, if they're good or if they're responsible, they'll play by rules. And I think we innately believe that the universe plays by rules, and that those rules are understandable. We may not understand them yet, but they are understandable through the process of science. And I think this is the fundamental difference with fantasy. Fantasy, you just make up anything you want. Any dream image that occurs to you can be in a fantasy story, because there are no rules. But in science fiction, we try to play by rules, the rules of physics, the law of gravitation. If you want to break it, you break it. Because, as Arthur Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So we can have things go faster than the speed of light. The thing that I admired about your three-volume trilogy was you showed over 1,800 pages, I want to say, how difficult it is to go faster than the speed of light, and how this would take enormous effort for us to do. But that there may be a way to figure out how to do it. But it's not magic. It's not like Star Trek where you can just go to some other planetary system in 2 minutes or something like that. You really made it the problem of space travel, of escape from the solar system, tangible and real. And you felt the vast effort that it took, spent over centuries of time. That's what made it truly epic. And by the way, I'm an enormous, enormous fan of his books. If you suddenly saw a sharp spike in sales in the United States, it was the weeks after I read them and recommended them to everybody.
哦，三体的粉丝们应该听了这话应该很开心啊。就卡梅隆先生是三体的这个读者，然后非常喜欢。他刚才说，如果你突然看到美国的销售量猛增的话，是因为他做了推荐。You invented, wonderful worlds like the Pandora, but what fascinated us the most are the creatures, including the cyborg, Alita, and starting from Terminator, or even farther away, the aliens. Is there a running theme between, throughout your work? Why are you so interested in those creatures, half human, half machine, different ratio or combination?
Well, I think, what attracts us to science fiction is that which is different, and comparing that which is different to that which is human. So, and asking the question, and I think Alita asked, the movie asks this question: what does it mean to be human? If we can change our body to a synthetic body, or if we can upload our mind into a machine, what does it mean to be human? And I think we're all, the way I see the world right now is we're living in a science fiction experiment. We're living in a science fiction world. Things that were predicted by science fiction have come to pass. We now live in that future. It's not a future that anybody imagined exactly as it is. It's really more of an experiment. And I believe we are causing our technology to evolve at a very rapid rate. And that technology is in turn changing how we live. And we are changing socially, we're evolving socially with our technology in this constant feedback loop. And nobody knows where it's going. We may be going right off a cliff, or we may be going to some better, or at least very different future. So it's all kind of very exciting. But it might be a little too exciting. But the theme, I think, that runs through all my films is, which is an expression of my own worldview, which is a love-hate relationship with technology. You love it and you hate it, right? Technology can destroy us, technology can make our lives terrible, it can destroy the world. Modern society can destroy the planet, climate change, pollution, nuclear war, and every other long list of things that science fiction writers love to talk about. But damn if it isn't seductive. Damn if you don't want to see what we can build next. Because that's how we are. We're clever, When I think of something that I think needs to be built that doesn't exist, sometimes I'll just build it. Sometimes I just want to see if it'll work. And so I know that feeling of wanting to make the new thing, the new machine, the new system. It's seductive. So it's a love-hate relationship, and I think my movies all deal with that.
Since this is a meeting, a dialogue between you two, we'd love to hear you pick each other's brains. 今天是2位科幻巨擘的会面和碰撞，所以我们希望更多是听到你们2位的互相的讨论和问答。刘老师，您先来。我知道您有问题给那个。
我的问题可能和中国的科幻有关系吧，就是大家也看到，就是在今年中国的春节，就是有2部成本很高的这个中国科幻电影它上映了，而且获得了巨大的成功。这可能也是中国科幻电影一个良好的开端。我想问卡梅伦导演，就是说，假如中国的科幻电影发展下去，你最希望看到什么样的那个中国科幻电影？
I think somebody should make your trilogy.
问题，现在就是说，对我们来说，从我自己来说，我觉得，倒是可能，希望拍一些那个比较容易一些的，我觉得，至少是有在视觉上比较容易一些，在故事上比较容易一些。三体的话，目前对，我们现在的经验来说，还有我们的这个能力来说，是有一定的困难。就是您设想一种，能不能设想一种您想象中的、您很希望看到的那种，中国的科幻电影，您很感兴趣的一种中国科幻电影是个什么样子的？就是不是说具体的哪个作品。
Well, look, I think that science fiction spans, you know, a variety of subgenres within science fiction, from, you know, wildly escapist to very, very dark and dystopian and bleak. And the interesting thing is that, and I'm going to go back to your books, there are 100 stories in those 3 books. And everything about, you know, the way in which society can evolve, the way in which technology can evolve, and our understanding of the nature of the physical universe, and also a kind of, there's a darkness in those books as well about the nature of humanity and what we would do to each other to survive. And I like to see stories that explore both those ideas, both the optimistic, you know, what grand designs can we create, but also the monster ultimately is the monster inside of human society, inside of the human heart. Now, I happen to be an optimist, so I like to see stories. They don't have to have a happy ending, but they have to have characters in them that are not all completely dark characters. So I like to see a blend of those things. But I think your question is, now that science fiction is really taking center stage here in Chinese cinema, let's just see more of it. Let's just see people explore all these different ideas. We shouldn't tell them what to do. Let's just have them explore the things that they're fascinated by, interested in, and the things that they want to see, the dreams that they want to see put up on the big screen. Because who knows what somebody's going to come up with. Maybe they'll do a film about artificial intelligence taking over the world, or maybe they'll do a film about artificial intelligence saving the world. Who knows? Maybe artificial intelligence is necessary to save the world from us. Let's make that movie. Somebody out here, go make that movie.
Do you have a question for Mr. Liu?
What are you doing next? How long do we have to wait to read it?
我接下来当然是写故事了，我是一个作家嘛，用全部的力量去写新的科幻小说，而且尽量想写一些和以前的题材不太一样的一些科幻作品。而且我写的时候，我肯定就是不去想我这个会不会变成电影，会不会很容易的变成电影，因为现在写作的时候，往往有这么一个恶魔式的念头，就这么缠着你，让你很难摆脱它。但是我还是试着努力去摆脱它，因为这个可能会带来很多的限制吧，对自己的思想。
所以科幻编剧们不用担心大刘不会抢你们的饭碗啊。
I agree with that. I think if you're really going to explore the truth of human consciousness and the human future, don't try to follow commercial ideas necessarily. Just let that thought process take you wherever it goes. I agree with that. The science fiction that I've written has been for movies. I'm not a novelist, so it's a different job in a way. And I've often felt that movies and television have spent the last 30, 40 years trying to slowly educate a broader audience about some of the ideas that have been in science fiction since the 1930s and 1940s. I always feel like a general audience is behind by about 20 years or so. And we're in an interesting situation now where the world has in many ways caught up with science fiction, and yet the literary ideas of science fiction are only now coming into the movies. So there's this weird lag where the world itself has sped up, but the audience, because the audience is very selective about what they like, and they don't necessarily always like the dystopian stories. In fact, science fiction almost died out in movies until Star Wars came along. You couldn't make any money off a science fiction movie in the 70s. In the late 60s, there were just too many movies about the end of the world and nuclear war, and, Planet of the Apes and diseases and overpopulation, all that stuff, one after another, boom, boom, boom. And then it kind of died out. And studios wouldn't even fund a science fiction movie. Science fiction was deadly. It was like trying to make a Western or trying to make a boxing movie. They're big genres back in the 50s, but you couldn't make them in the 70s. And then all of a sudden, George Lucas came along with Star Wars, and science fiction was now the new big thing again. So it goes through cycles of boom and bust, and then it was all otherworldly, interstellar, basically kind of westerns and mythology, type stories, but they weren't dealing with the hard issues. But now what I see is that it's all getting done. You've got the comic book, Marvel universe and DC universe, and those are science fiction worlds. And then on the other hand, you've got Ex Machina and Arrival and films like that that are pretty serious and are dealing with some interesting problems. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess some people call one the hard science fiction and the other soft sci-fi. Do you believe that, say, in a market like China's, it's better to start with soft sci-fi stories so that people are more familiar with this genre, and then come up with stories, hard sci-fi stories like Three-Body Problem?
Well, you know more about how people think here, so maybe you should answer that.
其实我自己也不太对中国观众，对于我们自己中国人自己拍的科幻大片的反应，我也不是太清楚之前。这对我们来说几乎是一个千古之谜了，我们对此都很好奇。但是今年的春节，至少我们部分的找到了一个答案，就是他们的反应还是很让人高兴的。至于说中国未来科幻电影它的发展方向，我认为应该，就是说正确的方向应该是多种风格的、各种各样的科幻小说都得到科幻电影啊，说实话都得到充分的发展。有那种很传统的、很硬的科幻，也会有那种我们说的很文学的，或是很大众化的这样的科幻，这才是一条正确的道路。我不希望看到中国的科幻电影被某些作品，或被某种类型的作品形成的一个框架给框住了。这个是我认为是一个很不乐观的一个现象。当然了，现在说这些有点早，我们的一切才刚刚开始，还有很长的路要走过。
Yeah, that's a great answer. I agree with that completely. I've sort of tried to inhabit a middle space because I come from a background in engineering and physics and astronomy, but also storytelling and literature, because I studied both. Actually, my math wasn't so good, so I moved from studying one to studying the other. So as a filmmaker, I kind of inhabit a middle ground. When I make a movie like Avatar, I think of it as more of a kind of a soft science fiction kind of story, more of an allegorical kind of story, and not so much about spaceships and robots and things like that. But I also spend a lot of time on figuring out the technology and how the ships fly and why the mountains float, and room temperature, class 2 superconductor, that sort of thing. So the science all sits behind it, because in my mind I want it to all have a rationale, but I don't necessarily spend a lot of screen time on that. And the same thing with Alita. This city is not just some floating thing. It's the bottom end of a space elevator that's going out 30,000 miles into space, and there's another countermass on the end of it, and there's a whole story about that world up there that maybe someday we'll get to tell. But sort of the math and the engineering has been worked out. But because I think audiences get a little bored with math and physics, you know, I'm not bored that they're just not all equally interested. I try to do science.
Intimidated by
I don't think we're too intimidated by technology these days. I think it's really more just, that's not what people want to see. They want to see action, or they want to see romance, they want to see emotion, they want to see relationships. So I've always tried to walk a line in between. But I'm not trying to tell anybody how to do anything. I mean, I think every filmmaker is going to have a different perspective and different things that interest them. And I think you're right. Let's not put it in a box. Science fiction is all about getting out of the box. I mean, if you're doing it right, you can't even see the box. The box is in another universe.
Well, what is a good relationship between literal sources and film as the mass platform for science fiction stories?文学的根源就是科幻文学跟科幻电影之间应该是一种什么样的关系是最好的？
其实我感觉吧，就是科幻电影本身，特别是那个高成本的科幻片啊，它更适合原创那个剧本，而不是说适合改编。我觉得，但是，近年来，至少美国科幻电影这个改编的比例好像是增大了。你像这个火星人呐，就是火星救援，降临啊，湮灭啊。而据我所知，最近《沙丘》可能要在3月份开拍。
沙丘跟降临是有书的，是书在前面。
哎，对，都是书。但是我觉得中国的科幻电影可能，原创可能更适合一点。现在的问题是我们，国内很缺少这个科幻编剧，这是我们科幻电影发展的一个急需解决的一个问题。但是这个也需要时间，去培养。去鼓励他们这个科幻编剧的成长。
Fiction I've done, it's all been original, and you know, look at the science fiction that has historically revolutionized cinema, and the two highlights that come to mind immediately are 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars, in terms of really changing our perception of science fiction in cinema and even cinema itself. In the case of 2001, they were original. I think historically we've always had a hard time adapting science